Thoughts. A marriage between language and consciousness. That little voice inside your head allowing you to analyze and make decisions. These thoughts share our darkest secrets and our fondest memories. They allow us to form opinions and contemplate our actions, to reflect on the past and plan for the future. But what are thoughts? Are they even real? One could argue that they are just a figment of your imagination. It's not like they can affect the physical world around us. Or can they? Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. These lessons we were taught as children, yet modern science is beginning to tell a much different story. To understand how powerful our thoughts are, we first need to understand the power of our brains. The human brain is the most advanced organism in our known universe. It is so complex and powerful that only the fastest of supercomputers can even come close to the capabilities of the human brain. In fact, if our brains were computers, they would process approximately 38,000 trillion instructions per second. That's 38 quadrillion bits of information all in 1 second. To date, the fastest computer released to the public can process only about 10 trillion instructions per second. It would take about 3,800 of these chips to equal one human brain. Now, the average home computer processes about 3 to 5 billion instructions per second. It would take about 10 million of these computers to equal one human brain. At any given time, our brains are receiving billions of different signals from all around our bodies. Each one of our sensory organs for sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste are always hard at work sending information to our brain. And each one has millions of nerves that gather data and send little electrical impulses to our brain. That's a lot of data. This is one of the reasons why our brains need to be so powerful. Our subconscious mind has a mere fraction of a second to sort through all of these different signals and figure out which ones are important enough to pay attention to and which ones it can ignore. Like right now, you're probably not thinking about the sleeve on your shirt touching the skin on your arm or your pants touching the skin on your leg. The nerves on your leg are sending the signal to your brain. Your brain is simply filtering out those signals until something happens that is worth paying attention to. But if, say, a dog were to bite you on the ankle, your subconscious mind would say, "Hey, this is something that's worth paying attention to. Let's alert the conscious mind to this sensation." So our subconscious mind has to sort through all of these billions of different signals to determine which ones are important enough to pay attention to and which ones can be ignored. Meanwhile, it also has to direct all the necessary functions of our organs to keep us alive and well. It has to tell our heart to keep beating and our lungs to keep breathing. It has to tell our digestive system to break down the food and distribute the nutrients throughout our body. It has to tell our body to heal the cut on the back of your hand that you may not even know that you have. And these are just a few of the many, many tasks that our brain has to do at any given moment, which is why our brain has to be so powerful. Now, with such a powerful tool in our head, why is it that our conscious mind seems so limited? The average person can only think about maybe 3 or 4 things at one time. Most people's short-term memory can only memorize a sequence of about 7 numbers. Why is there such a disconnect between our conscious and subconscious mind? We do know that it is possible to bridge this gap and access the processing power of our subconscious mind. We have seen examples of this in people known as savants. Savants are people that have seemingly superhuman brain powers. Although it is very rare, these individuals can do things like solve extremely advanced mathematical equations nearly instantly in their head, much like a human calculator. Some have extraordinary memories and can recall an incredible amount of detail. Things like the score and lineup from any major league sporting event in history, or what the weather was like on any specific day since they've been alive. Unbelievably accurate photographic memories, individuals who can hear a song one time and recreate it note for note flawlessly, all from memory. These are traits of savants. Many cases involve people with autism or those who have experienced some sort of head trauma to the left side of their brain. It is believed to be the cause of the right hemisphere compensating for the damaged left hemisphere of the brain. Whatever the cause may be, it serves to provide us with a peek into what the potential of the human brain really is. Here's some food for thought. All animals on this planet have advanced biological systems that require a brain capable of handling a large amount of data. It is also very probable that this disconnect between our subconscious and conscious mind is shared amongst many life forms on this planet. Consider your pet cat or the squirrels running around in your backyard. It's very probable that their subconscious mind is capable of handling a vast amount of information far beyond that of your conscious mind. Perhaps we're just one head injury away from a lab mouse trying to take over the world. The 100th monkey experiment began in Japan in the mid-20th century. Japanese scientists were observing a species of monkey across a series of islands as they would place sweet potatoes along the shoreline for the monkeys to eat. The sweet potatoes would become covered in sand, preventing the monkeys from eating them, until one young monkey eventually discovered that she could rinse the sweet potato off in the water, washing away the sand and allowing her to eat the potato. Soon after, some of the other monkeys observed this and began rinsing the sweet potatoes off themselves. Over the course of the next 5 years, more and more of the monkeys learned to do this. Then at one point, a critical number of the monkeys had learned to wash their sweet potatoes. And then suddenly, overnight, all of the monkeys began to wash their sweet potatoes, even across the waters onto the surrounding islands and beyond. All of the other monkeys seemed to somehow innately learn how to wash their potatoes. It was like some sort of collective unconsciousness had somehow brought this information to the masses. This is what is called critical mass. It has been studied for years, and the results have been duplicated across numerous experiments. One such experiment was done on humans, where a large test group of people in England were brought in individually and shown a picture. This picture had about 101 faces hidden within the drawing, and each person was asked to pick out as many of the faces as they could find. Most of the people were only able to find maybe 5 or 6 of the faces. Next, they aired a closed-circuit television show only in Australia that showed the picture and the location of every one of these faces. They then went back to England and brought in another large test group of people to ask them once again to see how many faces they could identify in this picture. Having never before seen this picture, suddenly nearly all of the test subjects were able to identify nearly all of the 101 faces. It was as if this information had hit critical mass and was suddenly available to everybody across the species. Another study found newspaper crossword puzzle enthusiasts had a 5% higher completion rate on puzzles attempted 24 hours following the release of the newspaper, thus allowing more people to have already completed the puzzle. Some skeptics claim that the results of these experiments are inconclusive, so I do urge you to form your own opinions. You may be familiar with the law of attraction. It stems around the idea that having positive or negative thoughts could attract positive or negative experiences into one's life. Or that if you merely believe something to be true, that the universe can be influenced into making it become a reality. While this may sound like a pseudoscience, many researchers are finding evidence supporting the fact that our thoughts may have an effect on the physical world around us. We have seen fascinating experiments done with water showing how it can be influenced by our thoughts and intentions. Chinese scientist Dr. Emoto dedicated his lifetime of research towards finding a better understanding of this phenomenon. One such experiment involved taking photographs through a microscope of the crystallization pattern of frozen water. This was done by adding various words onto the container, words like love, hate, peace, and many others to see what kind of effect this would have over the crystallization pattern of the water as it freezes. He believed that this was based mainly on a person's intentions and that the word merely acted as a means to channel this intention. It was later discovered that the person handling the water left a distinguishable imprint that could be traced back to that individual. Another example of this phenomenon is Dr. Emoto's rice experiment, which is one that you can do by yourself at home. To do this, take 2 clean mason jars and some white rice. Boil the white rice and then put equal amounts in each jar. Put the lid on and write love on one jar and hate on the other jar. Now over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks, spend at least 1 minute each day focusing on that jar and projecting that emotion into the jar. So the one labeled love, project love. The one labeled hate, project hate. Usually within about 10 or 11 days, you should see some results. Many have reported similar findings using apple slices. Try and keep an open mind and an optimistic view when conducting this experiment. This is important because if your thoughts and intentions have an effect over the rice, your doubt could have a negative impact on the experiment. Considering the effect that our thoughts have on things like rice and water, and the fact that our bodies are made out of primarily water, imagine what our thoughts must do to each other. In the 1960s, the theory of primary perception was developed by Cleve Baxter. He was one of the CIA's leading polygraph machine operators, otherwise known as a lie detector. One day, Cleve hooked an unfertilized chicken egg to the polygraph machine, and to his surprise, it was giving off readings as if it had a heartbeat. He conducted additional experiments using yogurt and found that the yogurt cultures would give him readings as well. He then began experimenting on plants, and the results of his findings across these experiments were quite astounding. One of the ways the polygraph machine works is it places 2 sensors on your body, usually on 2 separate fingers, and it sends an electrical current from one sensor across the body into the other sensor. By measuring the electrical resistance across your skin, the polygraph can determine when somebody gets nervous because your body lets out tiny little beads of sweat. The sweat, in turn, allows electricity to travel across your skin more easily. This is a very small difference, but enough for the machine to pick up on, and it will record a spike at that moment the person is experiencing stress. So when Cleve Baxter hooks this device up to the leaf of a plant, he begins to notice that the plant is giving off very similar readings to that of a human. He decides to take this a step further to see if he can get a reaction by causing the plant stress. First he tries crushing one of the leaves, and sure enough, he gets a reaction on the polygraph. Next he tries to rip one of the leaves off the plant. Again, he gets a spike from the machine. He tries freezing the plant, he sprays it with a fire extinguisher, and a number of other experiments, each time getting a reaction. This was all very intriguing, but nothing could have prepared him for what was going to happen next. So he's standing on the other side of the room, across from the plant, and he's trying to think of what else he could do to get a reaction. He thinks to himself, I'll try burning it. And the minute he thinks about burning that plant, he starts getting crazy readings on the polygraph machine. It's as if the plant knew that he was thinking about burning it, and so it started to freak out. This didn't make much sense, and so he tried it again with many different plants, many different people, and every time they thought about burning the plant, it would show signs of stress. He would continue conducting many more experiments, and then one night, as he's eating dinner, he realizes that the plants in the room are having a reaction to him eating a salad. Not only did these plants seem to be conscious, they were aware of what he was doing, and they were not happy that he was eating their friends. But then he discovered something very interesting. He discovered that if he gave thanks to the plant, like saying grace, before he ate it, the plant stopped freaking out. It was like they were able to accept their place in the circle of life, and they were okay with it as long as he gave thanks before eating. In another experiment, Cleve took samples of saliva from a colleague of his and hooked them up to the polygraph machine. He was able to get a reading off of the living cells within the saliva for about 5 or 6 hours before the cells would die. During this time, his colleague hopped on a flight and flew hundreds of miles away to visit his daughter. Meanwhile, Cleve was monitoring the samples of saliva and recording any interactions and what time they occurred. What he discovered was that whenever his colleague would experience a stressful event along his trip, the saliva back home would have the same exact reaction at the same exact moment, even though it was hundreds of miles away. It was as if some sort of link existed between the man and his living cells that was unaffected by space, no matter how great the distance. And if this is true, imagine if we were to harness this technology, the implications that would have on communications. especially as we grow closer and closer to becoming an interstellar species. The double-slit experiment was first conducted in the year 1801 by Thomas Young. Its original intent was to settle the debate over whether light consisted of particles or waves. The experiment has been duplicated countless times, yet in more recent years it has provided some puzzling insight into the world of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is the theory explaining the behavior of microscopic particles like neutrons and electrons. But before we get into that, let's take a look at how the double-slit experiment works. First, imagine a wall with a barrier in front of it. Well, not quite what I had in mind. That's better. Next, we're going to fire a whole bunch of paintballs at the barrier to see what kind of pattern is left on the wall behind it. As you would imagine, the paintballs that make it through the slit in the barrier form a pattern on the wall that look much like the slit. Now if we add a second slit, we get the same pattern on the back wall, only in two places. Now let's try this with waves. To do this, we're going to place our experiment in a pool of water. And instead of using paintballs, all we have to do is tap the water to create ripples, which will represent waves. As the waves pass through the single slit, you can see the intensity is greatest in alignment with the slit, and then tapers off to either side. But as we introduce the second slit, something very different happens. As the two waves spread out, they come in contact with each other. When the high point of two waves meet, they combine their energy to form a greater peak. And when the high point of one wave meets the low point of another wave, they cancel each other out. The resulting image is called an interference pattern. So in Thomas Young's original experiment, he shined light through two slits, which resulted in an interference pattern, thus showing the wave-like properties of light. In the early 20th century, physicists began conducting the double-slit experiment on a quantum level. First they fired electrons through a single slit, and like the paintballs, they ended up with a single slit on the wall. But when they fired electrons at the two slits, something very puzzling happened. Suddenly, they had an interference pattern. How could this be possible? These aren't waves. These are particles of matter. Next, some physicists thought maybe somehow the electrons are bouncing off of each other and creating this interference pattern. So they repeat the experiment, firing only one electron at a time, thus eliminating the possibility of them interfering with each other. And over the course of a few hours, they end up with the same interference pattern. This was very baffling, and so they decided to place a measurement device pointed at one of the slits in order to see exactly which slit the electron went through. And what happened next would forever change our understanding of quantum physics. After placing the measurement device at one of the slits, suddenly the interference pattern is gone. And after many more experiments, the conclusion became unmistakable. By observing the electrons, they changed their behavior, as if they knew they were being watched. The simple act of observing collapsed the waveform and made them act once again like particles of matter. How is this possible? And why would observing something like a subatomic particle make it behave differently? To this day, we have yet to solve this mystery. There's a negative stigma about DMT that I strongly feel needs to be addressed. Across the world, people are beginning to speak up and share their positive experiences, mystical encounters, and life-changing realizations that have occurred during a DMT experience. Even many celebrities and public figures have begun to speak out and share these experiences. We are entering an age where more and more people are beginning to open their eyes and open their minds to something that was potentially put on this earth to help us learn and evolve. Let's take a moment to understand what DMT is from a scientific perspective. DMT stands for dimethyltryptamine, and it is one of the most intriguing and mysterious substances known to man. It has been used traditionally by many cultures around the world for spiritual and religious purposes as well as for healing. It is believed to have a profound effect on consciousness and can bring about powerful visions and insights. There are references to the use of DMT dating back to the earliest civilizations, and some theories even suggest that it may have played a role in our evolution as a species. It is the active compound in ayahuasca, a powerful psychoactive brew which has been used by shamans and healers in the Amazon for centuries. Scientifically, DMT is an endogenous neurotransmitter that is naturally produced in the human brain. It is chemically similar to serotonin, which is responsible for regulating mood, sleep, and appetite. When smoked, it has a rapid onset and short duration of action. It can cause intense visual and auditory hallucinations as well as feelings of euphoria and connectedness with the universe. There have been numerous studies conducted on the effects of DMT, with many suggesting that it could have potential therapeutic benefits for those suffering from depression or anxiety. It could even be used to treat addiction or PTSD in some cases. DMT is a natural occurring compound found in many plants and animals. Every ecosystem on this planet has at least one plant containing DMT. It is found in certain species of tree bark, grass, and even toads. In addition to its appearance throughout nature, DMT is also produced in our brains by our pineal gland. This pinecone-shaped gland in the center of our brains is often referred to as the third eye. It is highly regarded in many religions, with references throughout Catholicism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. The pineal gland is believed to be the source of our consciousness and our spiritual connection to the universe. It is thought that when we take DMT, it activates this gland, allowing us to access higher realms of consciousness and explore our spiritual nature. It is believed that the psychedelic effects of DMT are due to its ability to activate certain areas of the brain that are usually dormant when we are not under the influence of psychedelics. This activation leads to a heightened state of awareness and altered perception. Many people report having out-of-body experiences, seeing visions of spiritual entities, or even glimpsing into other dimensions while under the influence of DMT. These experiences can be quite profound and even life-changing for some people. A few other interesting facts about DMT are that it is not physically addictive and the effects of taking the substance wear off quickly. It also has no known long-term negative effects on the body or mind. However, DMT does have a very powerful effect on consciousness, so it should be taken with caution and respect for its potential to alter your perception of reality. Now that we've covered the basics, I'd like to take a moment and share my own personal take and opinions on the subject. Our brains are very efficient at figuring out how to process information. Elon Musk has demonstrated this with Neuralink. By feeding a computer signal to a brain, given enough time, the brain figures out how to interpret the information. Eventually, you end up with the working interface between your brain and this computer chip. But it's not just the computer chip learning the language of your brain, it is your brain learning the language of the computer chip. This doesn't happen overnight, but in time, your brain will learn to interpret this information and figure out how to process these new signals. So when you first begin to have this experience on DMT, you can expect wild hallucinations and a lot of confusing visuals and feelings. Your brain is receiving a flood of new information and sensory perception that it may not know exactly what to do with. This could possibly result in wild hallucinations. Over time, many have reported a transgression towards a more cohesive experience. While the intensity remains the same, the experience itself begins to take on a more clear and concise meaning. Certain routine parameters become apparent, and a familiar sequence of sights and sounds begins to take shape, almost like the opening credits to your favorite show on TV. Only these credits are full of complex geometric patterns and shapes. And so without further ado, let me introduce to you the Hopf fibration. The Hopf fibration is a pivotal concept in modern geometry and topology with far-reaching applications in various scientific fields, most notably physics. It was first discovered by mathematician Heinz Hopf in 1931 as a unique mapping from a four-dimensional sphere to the three-dimensional sphere, which creates an array of circles throughout this map. The discovery of the Hopf fibration marked the beginning of a new era in geometry and topology, as it revealed the specific mathematical structures that can be found embedded within different dimensions. Many people have reported seeing complex geometric patterns and shapes during their experiences on DMT. Oftentimes, these shapes are described as a sort of complex moving structure that folds in on itself in a flowing manner. For me personally, I have never quite been able to describe the appearance of this object, until one day, when I came across the Hopf fibration. Now, to be perfectly clear, the Hopf fibration is not exactly what I see during this state of altered consciousness, but it is very similar, and it provided the insight I needed to finally understand what it was that I had been seeing. But to reach this understanding, I had to dive deeper into what the Hopf fibration really was all about. The Hopf fibration is a mathematical concept that involves the mapping of higher dimensional structures onto three-dimensional space. It essentially represents the way circles can be arranged in a four-dimensional space, creating a mesmerizing visual pattern. But the fact that some people report seeing this complex geometric phenomenon during DMT experiences has some pretty fascinating implications. There have been anecdotal accounts of individuals who have experienced visuals similar to the Hopf vibration during DMT trips. These individuals often describe their experiences as transcending the constraints of our familiar three-dimensional world and offering them a glimpse into something beyond. They report observing intricate, ever-changing patterns and structures, which seem to possess a deeper meaning or order that they can't fully grasp. These personal accounts allow us to consider the possibility that the DMT experience might provide insights into a higher dimensional reality that is otherwise inaccessible to our ordinary perception. The striking similarity between the witnessed visuals and the mathematical depiction of the Hopf vibration could be more than just a coincidence. If this is true, then perhaps those who witness this shape are, in fact, encountering a fourth-dimensional object as it is seen from the third dimension. I've always associated this object with what some might call prana or tachyon energy. It felt like a representation of the platonic solid called the icosahedron. But the movement of it and the way that it flowed was exactly like this Hopf vibration. The concept of fourth-dimensional space can be both fascinating and challenging to grasp, especially since we live in a three-dimensional world. In basic terms, the fourth dimension adds an entirely new axis to the three dimensions we are familiar with: height, width, and depth. The Hopf vibration provides a way to visualize higher dimensions by projecting complex and extraordinary structures onto more familiar lower dimensional spaces. For example, when projecting the Hopf vibration onto a three-dimensional space from a four-dimensional one, you might see unique structures resembling circles and linked rings. These structures show the mathematical beauty of the Hopf vibration and offer a visual representation of a complex mathematical phenomenon. Though initially developed for purely mathematical reasons, the Hopf vibration has proven useful in various fields including particle physics, quantum mechanics, and string theory. The study of the Hopf vibration and higher dimensional spaces in general holds the potential to revolutionize our understanding of core scientific and mathematical principles. This research could provide insights into quantum physics, cosmology, data sciences, and even shed light on how our conscious minds perceive and interact with our surroundings.